My name is Ginny, also known as 2/3 Lotus, everywhere on the internet. This clip is part of my series, The Poets of Twitch, where I analyze my viewers' writing live on stream. Nothing has been edited out, so you're seeing this exactly as streamed with all of the imperfections and tangents that come with being live. If you want to catch me live or want more information, check out the description. Otherwise, enjoy some excellent writing. Is Garrett a viewer? No. This is something that Nico submitted because she really likes this poet, so I am reading it because of that. But Garrett is a published poet from Las Vegas who I guess Nico is a fan of. And hopefully this falls in fair use. Ode to an Adolescent Mind Obliterated by Nitrous Oxide by Garrett James Dillon. When the houseplants rape the dog, it's time to leave through the window. This could be a breakthrough. This could be a breakdown. So tenderize the knuckle or crack the bone. Honey, even the hands on my clock are shaking. Anti-anxiety is anti-survival. The whore's been dead for years. Burning a candle with no reverence at all. The dissociatives aren't working. So past the apocalypse. What do you do when the walls are too thin and the ceilings are too low? Ode to an Adolescent Mind Obliterated by Nitrous Oxide. Cool shit. Interesting. That's such a bad line. That's the title. A long title. I'm gonna read it again since it's short, and maybe 2 more times after that since it's short. When the houseplants rape the dog, it's time to leave through the window. This could be a breakthrough, this could be a breakdown. So tenderize the knuckle or crack the bone. Honey, even the hands on my clock are shaking. Anti-anxiety is anti-survival. The whore's been dead for years, burning a candle with no reverence at all. The dissociatives aren't working, so past the apocalypse. What do you do when the walls are too thin and the ceiling's too low? Ode to an Adolescent Mind Obliterated by Nitrous Oxide. I see the theme as drug use. Drug use as a call of the void. I love that theme. Yeah, so me myself not being particularly experienced in the using of drugs, nor someone who necessarily condones or encourages it. This one's a bit harder for me to pick up on, right? But I do understand the themes intellectually. I maybe don't feel them quite as well as someone who's had similar experience would, right? But there's a lot of great descriptive stuff happening here, so I think I'll be able to dig into this one pretty good amount. I've written and read a lot of things on that theme. Consider you the expert, although you have to go soon, stylish fail, I think you said, for your D&D. I'm going to read this one more time. Ode to an Adolescent Mind Obliterated by Nitrous Oxide. No expert, okay. When the houseplants rape the dog, it's time to leave through the window. This could be a breakthrough, this could be a breakdown. So tenderize the knuckle or crack the bone. Honey, even the hands on my clock are shaking. Anti-anxiety is anti-survival. The whore's been dead for years, burning a candle with no reverence at all. The dissociatives aren't working, so past the apocalypse. What do you do when the walls are too thin and the ceilings are too low? Ode to an Adolescent Mind Obliterated by Nitrous Oxide. You're not an expert. You've only had alcohol and weed. Don't have real reference for the harder stuff. But you've been around. Yeah, for sure. Nico had a few questions for me in submitting this poem, which I will take a look at here. Does Dillon have the voice of a dystopian punk rock Charles Bukowski that converses, babbles, and screams with and at the abyss as if they were lifelong friends? If not, can you still see the influences of the bim 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 big Charles man? What about his performance? So there's a performance here. Man was clearly inebriated / drunk. Would this performance look different sober? Does the setting of the bar change the perspective of the poem? That's interesting. And it's on Instagram. Okay. Many questions, but mostly we're looking at the potential relation and the themes alongside of Bukowski. We'll see about any sort of thematic or, well, no doubt there's some Bukowski influence, but I'm not sure if we'll come to a conclusion of a similar ethos that Bukowski holds within this poem. This doesn't have the same energy. Not in like it has less. It's just different, right? But I can see connections for sure. Even something as simple as talking about a clock or a whore. These are two of Bukowski's favorite words. But burning a candle without reference, like burning the candle at both ends, with no reverence, is what it says. Still works though, right? If we're burning down the candle of our life with no reverence, no care, that works just fine. And I like that interpretation. I didn't immediately jump to that, but I'll throw that in stylish fail. So you said burning down of like the self, right? Live hard, die young, right? Burn bright, go out fast. So I'll put live hard, die young. And burning down the self. Also, anxiety as a survival mechanism. You're doing my job for me here, stylish fail. But yes, right, anti-anxiety is anti-survival, but there are many cases where anxiety is going to keep us safe, right? Which makes anxiety a means to survive. And this makes sense. Anxiety is a fairly natural reaction to things that we fear, things that are overwhelming, so I agree with that. You have to run. Have a good one, stylish fail. Enjoy your D&D session. So, maybe let's go through some of these lines. This could be a breakthrough. This could be a breakdown. I enjoy this thoroughly. These two lines, this couplet, I suppose. In terms of, a breakdown, mental illness, right? There's clear ideas of anxiety, right? Dissociative, so dissociation. And the idea that you're sort of one step away, or maybe you're running on the same line with a breakthrough and a breakdown. This is extremely... I relate to this, right? That it is a fine line where when we're in these, like, extremely elevated or altered states of mind, be it through anxiety, through mental illness, through dissociation, through substance, it can sometimes feel as though the mind can pick up new things and really see new perspectives, a breakthrough. But of course, being one step from the breakdown, there's also this chance of everything just falling apart, right? And as someone who used to suffer from really bad manic episodes, this feels very similar, where you have this delusion, you're telling yourself that even in things like being or becoming God is something that I have experienced my brain like pushing me toward, and going absolutely full face first into a breakdown, right? Where everything's going to fall apart. But also having this idea that somehow this is right, this is the breakthrough, this is a positive thing. I certainly relate to that. When the houseplants rape the dog, it's time to leave through the window. I'm not sure what I think about this line yet, other than that it's very evocative. It's one of these sort of nonsensical scenes. I don't think there's a way for this to literally happen. Well, the leaving through the window, yes, right? But leaving through the window is interesting, because we can consider this a sort of alternate exit. We have many ways, let's say, to escape the house when things get a little weird, when things become hostile, when we have anxieties, when the world is difficult, right? We can leave through the front door, maybe cope in a normal way, or we can leave through the window. And I think this aligns very well with breakthrough, breakdown, because you can think about breaking in the window. These things immediately connected with me, like window and break are two very associated words. So, in a way, this says to me something like, when life becomes absurd, maybe not absurd, I haven't really spoken to that at all, but when life becomes difficult and confusing, this is one way to read this. There are many ways to cope with it, and one might be these different states of mind. Perhaps obliterating the mind with nitrous oxide. The breakdown, the breakthrough. Perhaps it's the anxiety. Or dissociation. Passing the apocalypse. Sort of a doomerism here. Is a way to cope. I guess I should explain that word. Some people cope with the difficulty of the world through, in colloquial terms, being a doomer. A doomer is someone who sort of feeds and finds identity in that end and the impossibility and the pain and the suffering. Sort of your perennial moping depressive. You're constantly anxious over the world. You're hiding in the room because the world is hostile, right? This is sort of a doomer. So the idea of passing the apocalypse, reveling in a way like a drug on the end of things, I would call this sort of doomerism here, right? where there is a sense of identity in the end. And that's cool. What do you do when the walls are too thin and the ceilings are too low? Now, we talk a lot about houses and rooms and space in poetry. The home. This is associated with many, many, many things. As a symbol, right? We'll make this a small symbolic analysis, where we just want to look at the symbol, kind of look at anything that this could mean, right? Write it down and see how these things might connect to our poem. And we just want to think about the house in a vacuum as a symbol. So, for example, in culture, this means safety, right? This can mean family. This can mean the self. This is used a lot. The representation of the home or the room, the bedroom, as the self, where it is a reflection of you, the way you live, and who you are. For example, Drowning Devil did this in a poem recently, talking about another viewer, talking about their room having gray walls, trying to plaster over it, but it always fundamentally being gray. And that being a metaphor for their mind, right? So this could in the same way be doing the same thing. But the home, safety, family, self, food is one, maybe. Can be associated with just like warmth. These are all things. Community. Rest. Homes can be associated kind of in an alternate way societally with abuse came from a bad home or something like that. So it goes in many, many directions. And considering we're talking about the walls, the ceilings, even we say the houseplants, as we look into this symbol, I think we might find some connection to some of these themes. The window is even part of the house, because we do create a picture of the house with the walls, the ceilings, the houseplants, the window, the dog, part of the family, if you will. Even something like a clock on the wall. These are all parts of the home. And I think what the home means is very important in this poem, because it's sort of the running symbol here. We have other symbols, the candle, which we already did a sort of automatic symbolic analysis, talking about, the candle burning as also the self, right? Burn bright, burn fast, burn bright. The brightest candles burn the shortest. Those kinds of phrases, right? So that's like another symbol here. Maybe even the clock, something like the substances of abuse, either the nitrous oxide, dissociatives, could also be symbols. But I think the fundamental one is the house. And we'll dig into that in just a moment. I want to take a quick break. Going to run an ad and drink some water. Consider this self-care time, water, rest your eyes, med check, all of that. Even if you're watching on YouTube, take some time away. Welcome back. I'm still Ginny, still known as 2/3 Lotus, and we're still reading Ode to an Adolescent Mind Obliterated by Nitrous Oxide by Garrett James Dillon. I'm going to read through the poem since we just took a break, and then I will go back into talking about the home as a symbol. But first, here's the poem again. When the houseplants rape the dog, it's time to leave through the window. This could be a breakthrough, this could be a breakdown, so tenderize the knuckle or crack the bone. Honey, even the hands on my clock are shaking. Anti-anxiety is anti-survival. The whore's been dead for years, burning a candle with no reverence at all. The dissociatives aren't working. So pass the apocalypse. What do you do when the walls are too thin and the ceilings are too low? Ode to an Adolescent Mind Obliterated by Nitrous Oxide by Garrett James Dillon. Ray, welcome. You love the title. I love the title too. I think it's quite brilliant. And we're talking about the home as a symbol. I went through and listed a bunch of sort of normal associations with the home culturally: safety, family, self, food, warmth, community, rest. Abuse occasionally as something that might be associated with the home. There are many more. If anyone in chat has anything that might be associated with the home, the houseplants, the window, the walls, the ceilings, then do include that in chat. But one big one that I want to talk about is the home as a symbol for the self. This is my favorite use of the home as a symbol. In many cases. Maybe I just really like it. And I feel the use here, personally. So, let's talk about it. First line. When the houseplants rape the dog. Right? Both of these, I would say, are inextricably linked to the idea of the home. Dog and the houseplants. You know, the dog lives in your home. The dog generally stays home unless you're like taking it out on a walk or to the park. And the houseplants, you know, it's in the name, house, right? So when the houseplants rape the dog, looks something like maybe the home turning on itself, or just in some way the home breaking down. And in that way, given that if we interpret this as a symbol for the self, it is the self turning on the self. And thus it's time to leave through the window. That would be leaving the house, escaping the self. Whatever that means. And we do already have an idea from the title, An Adolescent Mind Obliterated by Nitrous Oxide. When the home, maybe both literally, but also when the self begins to break down, one way to cope is to escape. This could be a breakthrough, this could be a breakdown, it can be good, it can also harm you. So tenderize the knuckle or crack the bone. Honey, even the hands on my clock are shaking. So the clock can also maybe be part of the home and the self, which would maybe mean if the hands on the clock are shaking. I mean, first of all, hands shaking, worried, anxiety, which we see in the next line. But this idea of time, Bukowski does the same, and I know that there's Bukowski influence on this poet, where when he mentions the clock, for example, he is literally referring to time and sort of the impending nature of his death, right? And in this sense, well, when things start to get confusing, when life gets difficult, one thing that happens is these thoughts of the end appear, and we have that fear. Anti-anxiety is anti-survival. The whore's been dead for years, burning a candle with no reverence at all. the dissociatives aren't working. So here it is again, a connection with the escaping the mind, right? Dissociation, escape the mind, which is in a way escaping the self and the difficulties. So, we are left here trying to escape ourselves, trying to escape sort of the home in our mind. So past the apocalypse, what do you do when the walls are too thin and the ceilings are too low? So, walls too thin, that's sort of like weak, or you can hear things from the other side. The ceiling's too low, of course, being cramped. You know, maybe if you're tall, you like hit your head on door frames or something. But if we're thinking about the self, if we're cramped, if our conception of the world we live in is weak and crumbling and constrictive, well then what do you do? And this maybe loops back to the title or to what is before. The dissociatives. I mean, unfortunately, maybe not unfortunately, but for this person who's trying to escape, unfortunately, the dissociatives aren't working. They can't escape this mind obliterated, right? And that's maybe, if we look at the house as the self, it maybe makes more sense why the houseplants rape the dog. Right, the house, the symbol of the house turning on the symbol of the house. Internal confusion, pain, simultaneous breakthrough, breakdown, right? This sort of war in the mind, I suppose. A few lines I haven't dug into. First is these two. So tenderize the knuckle or crack the bone. Honey, even the hands on my clock are shaking. So tenderize the knuckle, right? This is probably going to be punching something. Your knuckles are certainly going to be tender, hurting after you punch something. I know this. I punched 2 holes in my walls over there. You might actually be able to see one in the reflection of the mirror behind me on the screen. But to tenderize that knuckle, to punch, to lash out, perhaps, to crack the bone. This could be one's own, this could be to cause harm. But also, you know, we leave through the window, we break through. Perhaps this is like punching the glass, which I don't think normally works, but it could be a sort of evocative, poetic image, and I do like that, right? Punching, clawing your way out of this home that constricts you. Any means possible. And it makes sense, right? I will get out. That's a great connection. I will get out. Oops, that turned into a circle. Out, even if it hurts me. And this makes sense. The drug user knows, sorry, I wrote that over here, I will get out even if it hurts me. The drug user knows that the drug damages them. And yet, they still punch their way out of the mind with the substance. So that could be a sort of direct metaphor for that. Honey, even the hands on my clock are shaking. Anti-anxiety is anti-survival. So this line, anti-anxiety is anti-survival. We talked about this for a moment, but anxiety being beneficial in some way. Anxiety being a reaction to protect you from a world that is difficult, from a world that is painful. This is maybe, if we're talking about a sort of humanistic approach of psychology than it is the mind's response to something. Not so much a psychiatric condition, but just the world is horrible. And my mind finds some way to cope with it. Right? So maybe that's just... It could be that the anxiety itself, in its extreme nature, could almost function to do these things before. This could be a breakthrough, this could be a breakdown. Without the anxiety, with the sort of numbness of regularity, there would certainly be no way to survive. There would be no response that helps this person cope. But I'm not sure on that one. The whore has been dead for years, burning a candle with no reverence at all. So, burning a candle, right, we talked about this, the idea of burning bright. Burn bright. Burn out. And this makes, I think, perfect sense in this poem. If the candle is our mind, and we damage it to escape, again, the obliteration of the nitrous oxide, doing anything to cope with the world so that we can survive, so that the candle can keep burning, but with no reverence sort of a respect, right? Or sometimes religious, right? But it's functionally like revere, right? To respect religiously. So with no respect for the candle itself, with respect for the body, it takes a toll. And this happened to maybe the whore, which is, I think, a great symbol, even, the whore. Bukowski uses the idea of the whore as well. But a whore is someone who, profits in some way off of generally something that is probably damaging to their body. There's a lot of, abuse, manipulation, these kinds of things that happen within that world. I'm also super supportive of sex work. I want to make that clear. But the whore as a symbol, right, is this person, this lowlife who does the unthinkable for money, does whatever they can to survive, right? The whore is fundamentally someone who survives. They're making money. Does anything, maybe the unthinkable, selling oneself to survive. As a symbol more so, right? This isn't necessarily entirely like the nature of sex work, but as a symbol, I would say that's a fairly reasonable way to look at it. And we've already established this adolescent mind as one that will do anything, one that will harm itself, one that will go through pain, one that will maybe punch through glass, hands shaking, breaking down, just for the breakthrough that lets them get to the next day, get out of their mind that is so overwhelming. Feels like everything connects with that sort of interpretation to a poem like this. Now, there are a few questions from Nico, who submitted this. First of which, does Dillon have the voice of a dystopian punk rock Charles Bukowski that converses, babbles, and screams with and at the abyss as if they were lifelong friends? So, This is similar to Bukowski, I would say, in terms of the themes, right? The way that we cope with a world that is difficult for us, the way some of the actual specific words, but I mean, it's a different person, fundamentally. It's a different poet. And I'm not sure Bukowski, at least as far as I have read in roughly 20 poems, ever goes to the point of thinking he is throwing away the life he has, burning the candle down faster than it should. I think Bukowski, yes, drinks and suffers in a similar way, but Bukowski, where he looks at the clock, I think with fear and respect and death. He says in some of his interviews, especially later, that he doesn't fear death, right? This certainly has the same energetic fighting spirit of Bukowski, breaking through, literally punching Bukowski. Bukowski expresses this in his poems as well, and I think as poets, these two would probably get along. In terms of Bukowski's advice to have the poetry continuously, have the writing continuously have life, I think this poem delivers well. Does it go bim, 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 bim? Does it keep moving forward? And I would say, yes. When the houseplants rape the dog, it's time to leave through the window. There's no dwelling, there's no waiting there. There's no filling in the gaps, there's no da-da-da-da-da-da-da. As Bukowski says, this could be a breakthrough, this could be a breakdown, and then action. So tenderize the knuckle, crack the bone. Something more abstract, the clock. And then even further, anti-anxieties, anti-survival, and then jumping to new things. This poem has motion in a way that I think Bukowski very much does as well, right? And I mean, the question is sort of loaded in a way. Like, it's a leading question. Does Dillon sound like Bukowski? If not, can you see the influences of Bukowski? And I believe Nico said that, like, the back of this book that this is published in mentions or name drops Bukowski. So, but I mean, like, can I see the influences? Yeah, absolutely, it's clear. But I think there's more nuance. This person isn't cloning Bukowski in the modern era. I don't think, for example, Bukowski leaves poems at the end with questions. And I don't mean just literally, like, what do you do? But Bukowski says things like, at the end of a poem, the bombs will never go off, right? Perhaps now they will die in mine is the closest thing to uncertainty, because the world has failed us both. These are like the ends of some of his poems. I just light my cigarette and smile. There's some mystique there. I've been fighting ever since. I see where I've made plenty of poets, but not so very much poetry. These are strong statements. In my father's dead suit, waiting to die. These are very conclusive endings to a poem. I think Bukowski tends to capture everything and doesn't leave you much room to sort of argue, Because Bukowski very much is fighting you with his poems. Bukowski lets you in and then kind of throws emotions at you like punches. This one does similarly, but I think maybe it gives a little more of an ear, the poem, to the reader and to their thoughts. Bukowski I would probably describe as hyper-specific. If I'm drawing the specificity curve, maybe this is just because I read a lot of Bukowski. So, something like this. Specificity, number of interpretations. We talk about this curve a lot. When a poem is not specific, when it's complete rambling, it's impossible to interpret. And then as it gains coherence, it becomes, at some point, able to be understood. But this is not very specific, it still has many interpretations. And then as we get more specific, the number of ways you can interpret a poem comes down. Maybe like that. I don't know the exact curve, it's an approximation, right? But roughly this is the direction. Inverse relationship, or inversely proportional. Except this. And Bukowski goes very far to the right. Bukowski talks very specifically. I don't think Bukowski, if you pay attention, gives you room for your own ideas, which is lovely. I think it makes Bukowski great to analyze. This one lands somewhere earlier, right? And like I say, this graph is never a measure of quality, except in the fact that it measures these qualities, right? But the overall good or badness of the poem has nothing to do with how specific it is, how many interpretations one can find. And I would say in the grand scheme of things, this poem is still maybe pretty far over here, right? It talks specifically about drug use and coping in the ways that the world weighs. But I think Bukowski gives less room to the reader, personally. So that's a difference. It may be a difference of ethos between this author and Bukowski. I don't feel so much like this author is trying to punch me, if that makes sense. I am going to look at the live performance of this now that has been sent to me. I haven't looked at it, so hopefully it's fine for your Twitch. But this is my fault to take. It's in a bar and he's drunk, which sounds awfully familiar, right? Bukowski performing inebriated and such. And it'll take me a minute to pull this up. We're going to look at the video because it's really nice to hear the poet reading their own work, right? So let's switch over. I will come back to my face for a moment. I am really enjoying this poem, admittedly. I think there's a lot of good things going on. I think it says a lot, and it doesn't take up very much space, which is always a plus. So here we are on Instagram. I'm going to reload this. Get the volume up. There's Kendrick playing. Okay. Reload this.
Ode to an adolescent mind obliterated by nitrous oxide, and it goes a little something like this. When the houseplants wake the dog, it is time to leave through the window. This could be a breakthrough, this could be a breakdown, so tenderize the knuckle or crack the bone. Honey, even the hands on my clock are shaking. Anti-anxiety is anti-survival. The whore's been dead for years, burning a candle with no reverence at all. The dissociatives aren't working, so pass the apocalypse. What do you do when the walls are too thin and the ceilings are too low? I drank between poets. That's how you know. This is called Ode to an...
Interesting. So that's the poem, right? Read by the author, Garrett James Dillon. And so Nico asks about this. Go back to the form, maybe. What about his performance? Man was clearly inebriated/drunk. Would his performance look different sober? The setting of the bar changed the perspective of the poem. So, I mean, I can't speak too much to this author and what it would look like in other ways, right? But I think the performance is appropriate. It shows up and it's like, here's the poem, I'm gonna say it fast, you're gonna listen, and like, I don't know, it's a very confident performance, and you know, maybe that's alcohol, maybe that's not, but I think it was fitting, right? I think his words were coherent enough. Like, if he was slurring his words and I couldn't understand the poem, that would be a criticism, because my fundamental thing is, can I understand the poem? And he read clearly, and, well, what matters more than that, right? I like the quickness as well. If we're talking about poems that move, poems that have energy, that have Bukowski's bim, 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 their life, then yes. Interestingly, Bukowski does not read quickly. Bukowski reads his poems kind of like, when the houseplants rape the dog, it's time to leave through the window. This could be a breakthrough. This could be a breakdown. That's how Bukowski reads, right? Which is entirely different, right? So that in itself is sort of a differentiator between the maybe inspiration and the inspired, right? Bukowski, which is interesting, right? I think Bukowski really lets his words speak, the words themselves, and doesn't add anything. That's my guess of his sort of philosophy of reading, because it's extremely dry. And this is, when the houseplants rape the dog, it's time to leave through the window. This could be a breakthrough. This could be a breakdown. So tenderize the knuckle or crack the bone. Honey, even the hands on my clock are shaking. Like, I can't do it because I don't. But it moves. It doesn't stop. I don't think it. One thing is that it isn't extraordinarily, in the same way as Bukowski, it's not extraordinarily like up and down. I like to read a poem and sort of meander around in the way that I speak and do that. This poem is like Bukowski sped up, right? Where Bukowski just goes forward at a reasonable pace, and this was just like fast Bukowski. Maybe it's like young Bukowski, I don't know. I only ever really hear Bukowski in interviews when he's old, because it took him a while to get famous and make his millions. He died a millionaire, which is interesting. Like, he found what he wrote about wanting, which is fascinating. So, like, I don't know, I don't care if a performance, if someone is high or drunk or on psychedelics, if I can understand the poem, like, from a actual linguistic level, like, I can hear the words and differentiate them, and if the poem is something that grips me, then yeah, you know? Maybe that's what maybe I would call it something like, for Bukowski, non-performance. This is maybe an ethos of performing, where Bukowski shows up and he says, and he reads his poem and he goes just slow and uninteresting and bland. And this tells you, listen to the actual words. Don't listen to the poet, don't listen to the speaker. It is the words that matter, right? Non-performance. Very much the opposite of modern day slam, right? I would say slam, which I kind of dislike, is performative. performative, right? You evoke, you gesticulate, you yell, you whisper, you do whatever the fuck. It doesn't really matter, right? You get on that mic and you capture the crowd. And there's an element of personality here. And sometimes I feel this takes away from the words, which is why I don't like it. Or maybe it doesn't take away, but it serves as a distraction, often, in my opinion. Where the non-performance says, all you have in my performance of my poem is the words, I'm going to talk boring, and that's how it's going to be. Now, this performance of this poem we just listened to was probably somewhere in between. I would say I put it more on like the non-performance side, where it's just fast and words, and that's all you get. There's a little moment in the poem, tenderize the knuckle or crack the bone, which I think makes that particularly effective, right? When most of the poem is just ode to an adolescent mind obliterated by nitrous oxide. When the houseplants rape the dog, it's time to leap through the window. This could be a breakthrough, this could be a breakdown, so tenderize the knuckle or crack the bone. That sort of onomatopoeia, which is a word that is like a sound, crack or boom, these kinds of things, makes that really pop out and stand out in the poem, which is kind of lovely from a performance level. That word that I said, onomatopoeia, oh boy, onomatopoeia, oh, it turned into lines. You'll be able to find it if you look it up roughly. O-N-O-M, no, O-N-A-M, M-O-T-A-P, like E-I-A maybe? Not sure. But, so really, the poem speaks for itself in that performance, and the poem speaks for itself on the page, and this is how I like to write poems. Granted, I'm not sure my poems speak for myself, and half the time I fall into writing slam poems because, I don't know, open mics. I'm supposed to perform and get out there and be someone in the community, right? That's how poetry works. Community, social value, whatever. But poems like this are confident. Bukowski was confident in his poems. I don't think you can read a poem like, when the houseplants rape the dog, it's time to leave through the window. I don't think you can read a poem like that without being extraordinarily confident in your words. Because it says, I'm giving this so much time to these words, and I'm not going to bring you in with a performance, so they're good. Here you go. Listen to them. Now, if I were to critique this poem, which I like to do, this is a thing that I like to say, which I don't always deliver on, but it is critique everything. This we ought to maybe do as authors or artists in general. Anytime we are experiencing art, certainly we can say we like it, we can say we don't like it, but we should look at what the art is doing, how it does it, how it makes us feel, and what we would do differently. That isn't to say that we are like better than this artist or anything, but it's going to help us understand our style and the things we like. So, this poem. First, I find the title to be completely, like, perfect. It's long, it's sprawling, it's just ideas pouring out, and it really sets the scene for this poem. But going into it, and maybe I can also critique the performance. When the houseplants rape the dog, it's time to leave through the window. This could be a breakthrough, this could be a breakdown, so tenderize the knuckle or crack the bone. Honey, Even the hands on my clock are shaking. Anti-anxiety is anti-survival. The whore's been dead for years. Burning a candle with no reverence at all. The dissociatives aren't working, so pass the apocalypse. What do you do when the walls are too thin and the ceilings are too low? So maybe the way that this most echoes Bukowski is how it doesn't give you any extra words to say, well, I don't think this fits with the poem. It's efficient in the way that Bukowski's poems are efficient, and use no more words than they, I would say, have to express their ideas. At which point you maybe have to look at the words themselves and the ideas and how they're trying to express them. So, the main idea, as we said, probably, is the escape of the mind and the damage that it does to oneself. And, starting, the houseplants rape the dog. Parts of the home, parts of the self, damaging each other in ways that are extremely violent, right? I think rape is probably an excellent word here, right? This could be a breakthrough. This could be a breakdown. Again, breakthrough. Big, new, epiphany. This could be a breakdown. Again, breakdowns are big. When we think of a mental breakdown, they're extreme. So tenderize the knuckle or crack the bone. Tenderize is maybe a word that I wouldn't use here if this is really what I was trying to express. Tenderize feels like, when something is tender, it's like it hurts a bit, it aches. But I almost want to see this knuckle split open, right? Literally split the knuckle bleeding or crack the bone. Just because if we're talking about the expression of violence in escaping the mind, then maybe it could be more. I feel like tenderize is so much less compared to, say, pass the apocalypse, rape the dog, crack the bone. So maybe it's weaker. Honey, even the hands on my clock are shaking. Anti-anxiety is anti-survival. The whore's been dead for years. Again, these are extreme, like death, whatever. I like this. Burning a candle with no reverence at all. The dissociatives aren't working, so pass the apocalypse. What do you do when the walls are too thin and the ceilings are too low? It's an interesting end here, right? Because we describe these extraordinarily heightened reactions to the mind and to escaping it. And yet we describe finally the scene as the walls are too thin and the ceilings are too low, which feels almost maybe an understatement. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe it's saying that the adolescent mind should not have done these things. It was not so extreme as to take to self-obliteration, right? But they did in the poem, so I think it means the suffering is extreme. And thin walls, hearing things on the other side, there is a sort of idea of mental torment. Ceilings too low, suffocating, right? Feels almost claustrophobic, maybe. There's a dystopic sense to it, right? Apocalypse. But I wonder if the ceilings, we have too thin, too low, which is this repetitive thing. But if we wanted to do a sort of similar parallel, I guess it would be a rhyme, but it could be our crumbling and sagging, right? Which would be more extreme, and it depends, I guess, on the author, their intent to depict extremity, right? But if we're thinking about burning ourselves down the entirety of the wick, using substances, nitrous oxide, I wonder, as long as the house is still standing, like how much can we damage it in our description? So can we talk about the walls being hole-ridden or patched or crumbling or termite infested? I don't know, right? And the ceilings, I mean, wide, just low, sagging gives this feeling of weight that also is happening. I don't think you would use something like leaks in the ceiling. I'm trying to think of other ways that a ceiling could be sort of coming down on you, right? You could talk about, I don't know, the ceiling has less, right? But I do think that would be a choice depending on how extreme we want this to be. And there is something to say for, at the end of this poem, like, the walls were just too thin and just too low, right? These are things you can cope with. There are ways around this. And yet the adolescent mind jumped to what? Complete obliteration, right? Damaging itself, breaking itself, all of this. And it's an ode. It's looking to the past. It's looking to something that's sort of sad and bygone. So perhaps in hindsight, the walls were just thin and low, and someone overreacted, but that's also enough. Like, the space you live in, if it's a bit uncomfortable all the time, that's like sort of one of the greatest ways to torture oneself or to torture the mind, is have it constantly inconvenienced, constantly attending to the things that are minor sufferings, the little hells in life, right? Think like the water torture with the dripping water, right? So maybe it is to say that hearing voices through the walls, bumping your head on door frames if the ceiling is too low, is enough to drive one insane. And that really the pain of life is sort of the compounding of the little things. At which point, the house turns on itself. Punches through the window, houseplants rape the dog. That could be an interpretation, and I like that one quite a bit. And maybe if that's what the author wants to go for, because that's sort of my final interpretation here, you keep that, right? This is already a published poem. There's probably no editing to be had. But if we were just to lean fully into the extreme pain of things, then maybe we destroy the house more. It's a way to go. I really like this poem, clearly, being able to talk about it, and the depiction of the harm done unto oneself for that possibility of a breakthrough, of a dissociation that is better than the pain. I love it. So I'll read it again. Ode to an Adolescent Mind Obliterated by Nitrous Oxide by Garrett James Dillon. When the houseplants rape the dog, it's time to leave through the window. This could be a breakthrough, this could be a breakdown, so tenderize the knuckle or crack the bone. Honey, even the hands on my clock are shaking. Anti-anxiety is anti-survival. The horror's been dead for years. Burning a candle with no reverence at all. The dissociatives aren't working, so pass the apocalypse. What do you do when the walls are too thin and the ceiling's too low? Ode to an Adolescent Mind Obliterated by Nitrous Oxide by Garrett James Dillon. And since this is as far as I know, a poem in a collection by a living author who is from Vegas, I think, as Nico told me, because Nico submitted this, If I put this on YouTube, I will have in the description all of the ways you can go find them, find their work, support them. Thank you for watching. I encourage you to check out the rest of the series, follow if you enjoyed, and stop by Twitch if you want to share your own work. See you there.